Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's class. Today's class is going to be a little bit informal. I'm going to share a bunch of screens. I'm going to show you a little bit of the workflow because the class is focused on moving your concept, assuming you have collected a data set and you have 500 images or more. The question is, what do you do now? How do you get that data into a working generative adversarial network model that you can use to create new images? And I'm going to show you step by step how to do this. The instructions are also written down in the module on the page for this class. So you could go in, there's links. You can also watch the much more professionally done, much more clearer and more formally presented video from Runway about how to train an image generating model. So you can do that. But this video is here for you. If you want to go in there and try to figure this stuff out, I encourage you to do that. There is a key thing that I need to show you to make sure that you train a GAN and not a diffusion model. If you're paying an extra $10 into Runway, you are using the wrong system. So at the very least, please watch this video up until we get to that point so that you can understand where you need to go on Runway, because they've actually hidden this tool a little bit. I don't know why, but training a GAN is sort of now in the back end somewhere. So I'll show you how to find that. But I first want to show you what your data set basically can or should look like and what you might want to do in order to expand it. So these instructions are also in there as Adobe Photoshop, creating actions in Adobe Photoshop so that you could do things like rotate or change your images. So my goal is to get through some of this relatively quickly. You can pause it whenever you need to, but I'm going to talk more or less as smoothly as I can and record this in one go. As I said, it's pretty informal. So why don't we start? I'm going to share the screen here so that you can see. And I want to show you, to start with, my data set for a project called Infinite Beach, which we talked about before. This is when I went to Chesapeake Bay and took photographs of the beach. And this was what I used to train a GAN called Infinite Barnacle, which just produced more of that beach forever. So here's what the data set looked like. So you see here, let's zoom in. I'm using a Windows machine, just so you're aware. So you could see that this is a collection of images from the beach. Many, many, many images. Let's look and see, because I actually don't know. 5,000 files are in here. And this was just one afternoon at the beach. I was able to get 5,000 files. Actually, I think it's less than 5,000 because we also have the edited copy. So it's probably about 2,500. But we'll get to this in a second. So these are the originals. Now, if I were planning ahead, I would have taken this in a square format so that the size would be smaller on my phone, because obviously taking this many images on my phone was a big deal. So I would have taken these as a square format if I were smart, but I was not. So instead, I had to crop them. So now we have the second folder. I went into Adobe Photoshop. I created an action which cropped them into a square. These are still too big. They're 3024 by 3024, and they only need to be 1024 by 1024. So there's another set of these images where what we have are now 1024 by 1024. So they have been, basically we went from these originals, which are rectangular. They were 3024 by 4032 pixels. I then edited them so that they were square in Photoshop. And then I resized them down to 1024 by 1024. You will also notice that there are rotations in here. So you see this one and this one, these are the same image, but I flipped them. Same here. This is actually the same image, but it's rotated again. And then that image is flipped again. So do you see what's happened? This is one image, flipped horizontal, rotated, and then flipped. So this turned one image into four. Now, in theory, there's other rotations that could be done. But remember, if I just rotated this again, we'd actually end up with this one, right? So be mindful if you're doing this type of rotation of how many you actually need to do, and make sure that you don't have duplicates, that you don't spin it 360 degrees around so that you have the exact same image. So I've done this multiple times. You can see the same image is rotated in multiple ways. And so this is the data set that I used for that GAN. Another thing, just to point out, if you have not started collecting your data set yet, that these are similar in that they have similar elements. And so flipping them doesn't actually make much of a difference, right? There's barnacles, there's wood, there's sand and seaweed, there's some shells, but that's about it. These images aren't suddenly showing us pictures of people or a stray beer can, right? All of these things have similar elements in their composition. One of these was I missed. Look at that. A few of these I missed, actually. So just keep that in mind. But these are the images, cropped, resized, etc. I also mentioned another thing you can do is zoom in. So if you look up here, another thing we could have done, right? Rotate, rotate, rotate. Could have also zoomed in 10% and saved. And then this one would have been 8. So there's different ways of expanding your data set with the same set of images. This does not work if you're using things that are not symmetrical. So if I am looking at another data set, so these are also not exactly symmetrical, right? But the elements, it doesn't really matter which way they face. So I could have a branch go left or right. It really doesn't ultimately matter. So it's not about symmetry in that sense, but it's about patterns that can be reversed without distorting the effect, or turned upside down without distorting the effect. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute so you can see my face. Imagine if my face was upside down. As disturbing as that would be, think of how a GAN would process this. If you were taking 1,000 pictures of your face and you decided, I'm going to expand the data set by flipping my face upside down, my eyes would be here on half of my images, and sometimes you'd get eyes here and here. Sometimes you'd get a mouth up here, an upside down mouth, right? You probably don't want that. Maybe you do. That could be cool. That could be fun. If you want to make sort of monsters out of your face, you could do that. But if you're trying to generate actual realistic looking faces, you're not going to get that by flipping the data set upside down. You could, however, take my face and flip it so that suddenly, this eye is this eye. Would make very little difference because my face would still be more or less a face. So this is on you. This is for you to decide by looking at your data set. How can you flip it, reverse it, zoom in on it in order to make it more, in order to get more images out of the images you've taken? The more that you get, the better the realism, the more your model is going to look like your model. The more images you have, the more things you do to expand that data set. So do consider this. This is part of the sort of critical reasoning that I'm asking you to think through as you plan your GAN model and how you approach it. So think about that. Plan that out. Run a couple tests. Think about, if this part of the image up here is over here, is it still going to make sense? So I leave you with that, and feel free to ask me questions if you have questions about that. Once you have your data set, you will then go into Runway ML. And so I'm going to share screen again, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. And this is important. This is the part that I want you to watch, even if you think you know what you're doing. Watch this part so you know which model you need to be looking at and which training set you need to be looking at, because it's not intuitive and you might use the wrong one, which is going to be annoying for you when you submit it and I say you use the wrong model. So please watch this part carefully. I'm going to share screen again. Sharing screen now. Told you it was informal. Okay. So now you see my browser. This is what Runway looks like when you go, okay? It's runwayml.com. By now you should have had you should have signed up. You should have a login. You should be able to get in. So when you log in, it takes you direct to video tools. And if you look around here, you may say, well, where do I train this thing? Do I click on new project? What do I do? You might even click on AI training, right? This would make sense because we are training an AI. This takes you to something different. This looks like it's telling you you're going to do the thing that we're doing, but you're not. If you click on train here, it's saying new portrait, new animal, new custom, right? These are not the things that you want to be doing. You do not want to follow any of these screens. Train a custom generator. No, you don't want to do that, okay? Train. No, you don't want to do that. Train a new model up here. No. Okay, I'm annoying. I know, but please, someone is going to do one of these things. And I know someone is going to do one of these things. Please don't let it be you. All right, so no, not this, not this, not this. Here's what you need to do. You need to type this when you are logged into Runway. You need to go and type this URL directly into your browser. app.runwayml.com/models/ and you should see what looks like the ML lab up here on the top left. Please make sure this is what you are looking at. Now, when you are in the ML lab, you can click on training. And here you see three options. You see images, text, and object detection. These are not things that we need to do. We don't need to do object detection or text, though feel free to play with those on your own accord. We are doing generative image. Create a custom generative model from your own images. So we want to click on that. We want to give it a name. And once we do that, we select a data set. Here you see a bunch of my data sets that pre-exist. You see my weird hand experiment here. You see random pictures of birds. You see random collections of public domain art and photography. You see the plastic animal data set that I mentioned before. My willows are here. So you see, this is where all of the projects are capped. So here is my data set of barnacles. But just anyway, I'm going to go through this and say as if we're doing it for the first time. So to upload your own data set, you click this button, upload data set, it will open up your data set, it'll open up a browser. window. So I take all of my resized images, which are all in one folder, and I upload it. And it actually goes pretty quickly, despite the fact that it's quite large. So bear with me here. We're going to just upload this. And ideally, you put all of these images in one folder. All of your resized, cropped, rotated, zoomed in images all go into one folder. And then you can upload that folder. As I mentioned, a lot of these instructions are over in the Show Me the Data Class 17 module, including a video that will walk you through this process and including how to create actions in Adobe Photoshop. And I do want to mention that if you're creating actions in Adobe Photoshop, you can do one action that does all of that stuff, that rotates, zooms in, crops, and gives you, so one action can actually do like as many things as you need. So feel free, if you really want to be quick about this, learn how to make an action in Photoshop that could do multiple things and saves multiple times, so that it saves a different version of your image every time into one folder. But this is about creating actions in Photoshop. Hopefully these are things that you can find out how to do through the online tutorial. I'm not going to go through that here. But you can do that in Photoshop. You can also do it in GIMP. So that's the last word on the data set. But of course, if you have questions, please watch those videos. There's also a video for doing it in GIMP in the module if you want to use the open source version. But feel free to ask me questions on Discord as well. So, okay, now we are here. We have our data set resized and ready. So we could double click this. So here's another important piece. Training options. Choose a pre-trained model to start training from. I mentioned this before, but I'm going to mention it again. What you're doing today is not training a model from scratch. We're doing what I call priming a model. So a model exists. It has already been trained, and it has used a lot of energy and resources to learn from a data set. And what we are doing is biasing that data with our data set, so that everything that it has learned before, it's actually going to say, okay, I learned some basic stuff, but now I'm looking at a new set of data that I need to make sense of. But I've already learned all this other stuff. I've already learned the stuff that's from 400,000 images, and now I'm going to apply it to this chunk of 500 images, or however many you have. So I hope that makes sense, that we're not training a model from scratch. We want to click on Advanced, and we want to use StyleGAN 2. Some notes on StyleGAN. StyleGAN is trained on hundreds of thousands of pictures of faces. These were taken from Flickr, cropped by people, and then put together into a single data set that gives us images of human faces that are pretty much photorealistic. And we are going to use StyleGAN 2 for our own data set, even though our data sets are not faces. Maybe they are faces. Maybe your data set is faces. It doesn't matter. Your data set is whatever you took pictures of, right? Mine is barnacles. We're still going to use StyleGAN 2, even though it's been trained on pictures of faces, because it has learned how to make images already. It already has a pre-existing knowledge base of weights and biases, and it knows how to process images in order to make more images. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel, which means that you have saved yourself 999,500 pictures that you need to take. You can just use the 400,000 that it has already learned from, add your most recent 500, and boom, it's going to start training. So we're going to use StyleGAN 2 because this is the most advanced model we have at our display, at our disposal. This is will also create a greater variety of outputs, as you can see here. And what's nice about it is that it's 1024 by 1024, which means it's going to be the same resolution that we uploaded. StyleGAN, if we go here, it's 1024 by 1024, but it's not as detailed and it doesn't have as much variation. It just doesn't learn very much. StyleGAN 2 is the better version. So use StyleGAN 2, not just StyleGAN. All right. You may be tempted to go into presets and say, well, I took a bunch of pictures of cars. Maybe I should use the car data set. Don't. If you go into the objects data set, you're not going to get the high resolution and you're going to get no benefits out of using an object trained data set. You can try this if you want to later, but I highly encourage you strictly to stick to StyleGAN 2. All right. So you can change that, but I actually train on faces. That's what I use, regardless of whatever I'm doing. Finally, over here, we can crop this as a square if we have not done it by now. This will crop your image at the center. So if you don't want to do that in Photoshop or GIMP, you really fundamentally don't have to. And you could also randomly crop if you have rectangular shaped images, or you could just say, no, don't crop it at all, but that's going to be distorting. So I lied when I said, did you have to do this in Photoshop? You actually don't. But in order to get the most out of your data, you want to do this stuff in Photoshop anyway. So you can do stuff like rotate, zoom, and flip. So apologies, my ruse has been uncovered. Sorry. If you had 5,000 images, maybe this would have been helpful for you. But sorry, not sorry, I guess, because you're going to have a better data set because you did the rotation and the cropping and all of that. So here's our next piece before we start training. These are the training steps. So training steps, if you remember when we talked about GANs, training steps are basically where the model sends a bunch of randomly generated pictures to the discriminator. So the generator creates, the discriminator discriminates, and this happens through several cycles. And this is a training step. I'm going to read it out loud. During each training step, the model learns a little bit more about the visual patterns or features it finds in the dataset. Determining an effective number of training steps is a bit of a moving target. Too few, and your model might not be able to synthesize images with coherent visual forms that are reminiscent of those in the original dataset. Too many, and your model will stop improving and not learn anything new. So this should sound familiar to you if you remember our conversation and our quiz on GANs, right? You can undertrain, you can overfit, you can overtrain, you can have model collapse where suddenly basically the discriminator stops learning, stops being able to discriminate between random gibberish and the data set, and so it actually just sort of collapses entirely into just random gibberish. This stuff can happen if you don't hit the sweet spot. The maximum number, going on to read this again, the maximum number of training steps is 25,000, but a good starting point is 3,000. During and after training, you can review the model's learning progress at various steps. I start with 3,000. I just find that is really helpful for getting a good sense. I would not go more than 5,000. And it really is a matter of trial and error, and it can change based on anything in your data set. So there's no hard and fast rule for how many training steps you need to take. But 3,000 seems to do the trick, and it's cheaper, and it's going to be quicker. And if you are done with this model, you can actually go in and push it for 2,000 more steps if you want to, or 22,000 more steps if you want to. So my encouragement to you is start with 3,000, maybe 3,500, right? You can play with this. Just see where you feel good about it. Now, you will also get an estimated cost. So here I'm seeing $15. So you will want to ignore my credit card information. You will want to put some money into RunwayML. $15 will train this data set once. That is what I'm expecting. You don't have to do more than that. If you want to do 5,000, the price is going to go up a little bit. It's very relatively cheap. So this is 3,000 steps. It's 0.005 cents per step. So if you brought this up to 5,000, estimated the cost, you're now looking at $25. So roughly, like I said, we don't have a textbook in this class. I apologize to anyone. I get what it's like, but yeah, this is going to cost you about 20 bucks, 25 bucks. If you absolutely can't do that, please reach out to me and tell me, back channel, I get it. I'm happy to see what we can do. So we know that it's going to cost in advance, and we know how long it's going to take. So again, let's bring this back down to 3,000. This is going to take us 2 hours to train. Once you start training, this goes on the website, and it goes on in the background. You can just close out of it, and Runway will send you an email when the training is done. But all the more reason not to wait for an hour before class says that your project is due. It's going to take you at least 2 hours to train this thing. So do it in advance if you can. Anyway, once you start training this data set, your experiment is starting. This can take a few minutes, preparing everything to start training, yada, yada. I'm going to stop this because I have already done this experiment. But once you get your email 2 hours later saying it's done, you'll come back here and you'll go to My Models. And this is where your trained models live. So here you see my trained data sets. I don't have a very organized workflow here, but let's go back in and let's see if we click on Infinite Barnacle. We can click on Edit Info, and we can see all kinds of different things about our data set and about the model that we have just trained. All right, so let's do this again, because when you're done, this is going to be important. You're going to want to go to My Models. You're going to find your model. Yours is going to be much easier because you are only going to have one. When you find that, you click on Style GAN 2 or whatever you've named your model, right? That'll appear here. You can click on that. And now you're going to start generating images based on this model. So we have choose an import source. We can choose vector. And then we want to run the model down here. Now, this is also going to cost a little bit of money. It's not a lot. It's like 5 cents per hour or something. So we're going to start running this model. We see over here, the GPU is blinking. This means we are connected to RunwayML's GPU source, and that we are using their GPU to create images from our model. So when you get the email from Runway, it's telling you that your model has been trained. This is how you come in and start creating new images. And it's going to take a minute. And sometimes it's going to freeze. Sometimes it's a little laggy. Don't give up. Be patient. When you see this blue line going, that means it's starting. So finally, what we have is a basic shape of our latent space. And so we can click and we can look at some of the images that it is generating. So this is just a handful. It will actually generate more. As you click on these boxes, it will actually give you images below. It's just not giving us the preview. So you have this massive grid of potential images that have come from your data set. So I hope this makes sense. And then you can also regenerate the grid if you want to just see another random assortment of images. So you see how this is working. And you now see what we have built. And this comes from a data set that has initially started by being trained on faces. The models remembered how to create images from that training. But your most recent images, or here my most recent 2,500 images, have influenced it. So it is learning how to create more of the most recent information that has been introduced to it. Now, if you want to save an image, you could save that image here. You can click this button and it'll give you a dialog and you can save it. I want to show you something else. If you go back to models and you go into my models and you click on edit info, you can go in and you can export images and videos here. And it's going to load a preview and it's going to give you a random assortment of images just right off the bat. So if you don't want to go in and play with the space, you just want to generate some images, you could just click that. And what's also cool is that you get a little video over here, the latent spacewalk video. It's gonna take a minute. And this is a 15-second long video that you can export. You see down here, you can export the video. There is an additional cost, but when you export this video, you actually get this sort of, well, let's export the video. So this stuff goes into a queue. You are in line behind other people waiting to process it, but once it starts processing, it's relatively fast. But it will stick on 0 for a while as you are waiting for other people to finish with the GPU. You're using their resources, and so sometimes you have to wait in line. So this is 100%. It's still in progress. It's that famous 100% means like 90% situation. But when that in progress changes to done, we will know that we can watch the latent space video. There we go. Now, what we're looking at is going to be a representation of all the spaces, not all of the spaces, but select spaces between the images that the model can generate. So in other words, we saw that grid and how there are all those different possible pictures that were in that grid. This video is putting all of those images in the grid together. And as a result, it looks like an animation of all of the possible outputs. So here is an animation of all the possible outputs of one sector of what's called the latent space, or the possibility space that our image makes available to us, that our model makes available to us. So what we see is that it is shifting this one particular area and it's cycling through it. It's making this kind of these variations. right? And this is just one. You can generate a variety of these. You could go in and do that. But this is just kind of a cool side effect of having a model that's been trained. So I just want to review this one more time. You're in ML Lab. After you have trained your model, you go into My Models, you find your model. Yours is going to be very easy to find because there's only going to be one. You can click on Edit Info here in order to see all this stuff. And then you could go in and you can see export images and videos. This will load a preview with a whole bunch of different images that are randomly generated from your data set. And over here, you have a sort of slider that you could use to see what a latent space video would look like. This takes a little bit of time to render, but it's quite nice to have. And you can export the video down here, which is what we just did, this button. And you could regenerate what's in the pictures by clicking this random button here. Okay. You can also add it to the workspace. This right here, you can create a new workspace. It generates this random sort of name. Hit create, and it changes to vector. All right. And then there you go again. There's your model. And again, you can click on any of these boxes, even though they don't have images in them, and you can still see what's in those images down below in the preview. And this, you could zoom out with your mouse to see a very large, right? This is a massive thing that we're looking at. And we are looking at just a fraction of this thing. You can actually click and drag this to see all of the possible permutations that are coming out of your model. So this is pretty intense, right? There's a lot of images that can be generated. And what I wanted to point out too is that there's this interesting thing of very similar images being clustered together, because in the latent space, that's just how things go. It's a slight variation between one image and its nearest neighbor. So I hope you have fun exploring that, figuring things out. This will be the end of this video. I know that it's kind of a breeze through, kind of rushed, even though for as much waiting as we did, I know this is a bit rushed. Feel free to rewatch this thing. Feel free to stop and pick up anywhere that you need to. And feel free to ask questions on Discord, even if I've talked about them on the video. Don't feel like asking me a question about something I've said in the video is forbidden. You are welcome to ask me a question, even if it's covered in the video, because I know that this stuff can be tricky to get a handle on. So I'm going to stop sharing. Have fun. Please tell me what is going on with you as you're doing this stuff. Keep me updated on the Discord. If you run into any trouble, post about it, share it. You're not going to be the only one having an issue. These are tricky tools, and sometimes you don't know if they're not working or just really slow. So definitely, yeah, be ready for a little bit of a frustrating experience. But once you get it working, it's pretty fun. It's pretty cool. And ultimately, I am looking to see 10 images from your GAN that you have generated, that you could either go through and pick them at random, like I showed you, or you can go in and you can find them in that picker with the dots, the squares, that matrix, that grid, and you can pick the ones that you find really exciting and show me. All right, that's that. Have a good time playing with this. If you're ready, feel free to ask me any questions that you have. I will get to them as soon as I can. All right, and we will have an artist talk for our next lecture. So I'm excited for that. See you then. Bye-bye.